Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be digging a little bit deeper into the basics of Italian grammar. I am Irene, an Italian language tutor, so let's get into it. Today's video is going to talk about the reflexive pronouns and verbs. So in my last two videos I talked about verbs and I talked about pronouns. So if you are missing some elements, if you don't really know what we're talking about, I really suggest you go back and watch those. But before we start, please let me know that you find this video useful by leaving a like, commenting down below. On this channel we talk about Italian grammar, Italian tradition, Italian culture, some learning methods. We talk about books that can really help you speed up your learning process. So if you like that kind of stuff, just subscribe so you don't miss any future videos, and without further ado, let's get into it. So what are reflexive verbs? Well, the definition is quite easy. A reflexive verb is a verb where the action made by a subject ends up right onto the subject again. So the subject is both the one that makes the action and the one that receives the action. If you need an example, I could say I wash myself, and in that case, I am the subject, but I am also the end of that action. So why is it so important that I have to include it in this series of videos? It's because many of the verbs that we use to talk about our routines, our everyday life, those are reflexive verbs. And if in English the only thing you need is adding a myself or yourself or whatever it might be right after the verb, in Italian you need to know a couple more things. So in my last video I talked about the personal pronouns, the subject pronouns, and I might have just named the reflexive pronouns, thinking that it would be better for me to dedicate an entire video to them. And this is because the reflexive pronouns can be a little confusing, okay? So we have seen the personal pronouns that have the function of a complement. Most of those are going to be reused as reflexive pronouns. But there is one that is new, and that's the pronoun si. The pronoun si is used for the third person singular and the third person plural for the reflexive verbs. But it can also be found in the Italian language as an impersonal pronoun. As, for example, in English you would use, for example, an impersonal you, so you have to work a lot to have success. We're not talking about a specific you, we're talking to a general you. Same thing in Italian, but we are going to be using the pronoun si. So the translation of this last sentence would be si deve lavorare molto per avere successo. That's one of the uses of the pronoun si. What we are interested in is the reflexive function of that pronoun. So let's quickly run through the pronouns, the reflexive pronouns that we're going to be using for the reflexive verbs. We have mi for I, ti for you, si for he or she, ci for we, vi for you, plural, and si for they. So we have mi, ti, si, ci, vi, si. Okay, so now we have the pronouns set down. One question that could come up could be, okay, so we have the pronoun, we only need the verb now. Yes and no. So in general, the personal pronouns are not necessary when conjugating a verb. When the verb is a reflexive verb, things change a little bit. First of all, we have the reflexive pronoun, and then we need the verb. What do we do with the verb? How do we conjugate the verb at the reflexive form? If we are talking about an infinitive, and what is an infinitive? The infinitive form is the one that you are going to find on a dictionary. So for example, to go, to be, to like, and so on and so forth. So if we are talking about the infinitive form, what we have to do is take the infinitive, okay, let's say lavare, okay, to wash, lavare. to transform that verb into its reflexive correspondent verb, what we have to do is drop that last E and then add C. And why C? Because C, as we said, is impersonal, can be general, not only referring to a third person singular or plural. So lavare becomes lavarsi. When it comes to conjugating the indicative, we need to take into consideration a few things, okay? So first of all, the simple conjugation, not the reflexive conjugation of the verb lavare. Lavare is a very simple, very regular verb, very common, so I suppose you already know how to conjugate it, but let's go through the whole conjugation. It would be io lavo, tu lavi, lui, lei lava, noi laviamo, voi lavate, loro lavano. Okay, so this would be the standard conjugation. As I said in the video about verbs, the personal pronoun isn't always necessary, and that is valid in the reflexive verbs too, but just the personal pronoun, not the reflexive pronoun. So you can have the reflexive conjugation with or without the personal pronoun. So io, tu, lui, lei, noi, voi, loro. What you have to have is the reflexive pronoun. What we're gonna do is conjugate the verb normally, and before that we want to add the reflexive pronoun. And sometimes before the reflexive pronoun we want to have the personal pronoun. I don't know why I said it from the end to the beginning. That's how I always do. But so basically, personal pronoun, reflexive pronoun, and normal conjugation of the verb. Io lavo becomes io mi lavo. Tu lavi becomes tu ti lavi. Lui or lei lava, lui lava would be lui si lava. Or lei si lava. Noi laviamo would be noi ci laviamo. Voi lavate, voi vi lavate, loro lavano, loro si lavano. Whew. Okay, so a few things about verbs in this form. Verbs can be reflexive. Okay, io mi lavo, I wash myself. Lei si lava, she washes herself. But they can also be reciprocal. So for example, io e Luca ci salutiamo. Luca and I greet each other. The form is exactly the same. The verb will have to agree with the subject, of course, but the meaning is slightly different. It's not just reflexive, it's reciprocal. Then, one more thing that I want to add is this. You will find certain verbs that in Italian are both transitive and reflexive, only reflexive, or just reflexive in form, but with a non-reflexive meaning. They're just intransitive, but they're not really like reflexive in terms of meaning. So, for example, vergognarsi, to be ashamed. Io mi vergogno. If you look at the form, io mi vergogno is a perfectly normal reflexive verb, but in meaning, it's not really reflexive. It's just, I am ashamed. So these things can be a little bit tricky, but it's all about just getting to know each verb and getting familiar with the language. All of these rules aside, okay, one thing that we can do now is I can go ahead and describe my daily routine, even though I don't really have a routine, but I'll make one up just for you. Because when we are talking about our routines, we are gonna be using a lot of these reflexive verbs. So, here we go. Ogni mattina io mi sveglio alle 7 e dopo aver passato un po' di tempo al telefono mi alzo verso le 7:30 mezza. Quando mi alzo, vado subito in cucina e mi preparo la colazione. Mangio la mia colazione e bevo il mio caffè. Dopo la colazione vado in bagno e mi lavo. Una volta finito di pettinarmi, torno in camera e faccio il letto. A quel punto è ora di iniziare a lavorare. Mi siedo alla scrivania e inizio a insegnare. A mezzogiorno mi alzo e mi cucino il pranzo, che mangio velocemente per tornare a insegnare presto. Quando finisco di insegnare è pronta la cena che mangio insieme alla mia famiglia. Dopo aver mangiato la cena mi alzo, mi lavo i denti e mi preparo per andare a letto. So as you could see in this exercise, I don't always use the personal pronoun. I don't always say I. I sometimes do, but not all the time because it's not compulsory. But I always have to use the reflexive pronoun and the verb conjugated normally. Alright, okay, so hopefully this video wasn't too long and too complicated. I decided to include it in my series of the basis of Italian grammar because these are very common verbs that I always teach like at the very beginning. And yeah, so I really hope that this was useful and that you learned something new or that you revised something that you weren't as sure of. And thank you so much for spending time with me. I really appreciate it. Again, let me know if you enjoyed this video by leaving a like, commenting down below, and subscribing if you are new. And I will see you very soon with some more content. I have some interesting things coming up. I'll see you soon. Take care, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye.